you will not be good at being joyful in the way that you can envision yourself being joyful. But it is good enough for you to be a little bit more happy. The pardoning of the January 6th rioters was personal for AOC in a way that it wasn't personal for you and me. Because on the list of pardons were people who had made specific threats against her life, her personally. And you might be thinking, why are you talking about those pardons? That was 700,000 news cycles ago. Since then, the USAID has been collapsed, the DEI orders have gone out, the deportations have started. Why are you talking about something that was so long ago? Well, for starters, because it is the well and true death of the Republican Party as the party of law and order. Those people violently attacked police, right? Pretending to back the police and literally backing the police has been a core component of the party of law and order. And in pardoning the January 6th protesters, Republicans have symbolically and literally and legislatively moved away from the idea of the law as the most fundamental and important thing to the leader as the most fundamental and important thing. But that's not why I'm making this video. 3 days ago, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez gave a interview with Latino USA where she was discussing the deportations and the Republican strategy of overwhelming us by attacking on all fronts, creating confusion, etc., etc., etc. There was a moment in the interview that took her away from out of the category of political celebrity and put her, for me, in the category of person. And it's when she asked her about the trauma of the event, and she described the door being banged on, the locked bathroom door being banged on, and she was for a moment well and truly sure that she would die. When asked about her reaction, she said, "I'm not going to give them my fear. I don't want to give them my fear. I'm not going to give them my fear. These people run on fear." You haven't heard from me in a while because I've been teaching 8th grade science, and I'm going to keep doing that. I've recently got into 3D printing. I'm 3D printing fidget cubes for my ADHD kids and all of my other kids, because it turns out when you design a classroom for neurodiverse students, you end up building a classroom that works for everyone most of the time, if possible. I'm saying most of the time, if possible, because I am constantly reevaluating my teaching practice, and I don't want to make overly general claims. And I'm, as most teachers, constantly aware of the flaws in my teaching, but that's not what this video is about. I mean, actually, it kind of is, though, because there are private ways that all of us experience the temptation to despair. And in the onslaught of Republican nonsense, and not just nonsense, effective violence, both political violence, institutional violence, and rhetorical violence, what Brian Stevenson might call the narrative battle, but that's something to discuss in other videos. We all are facing, at this point, the temptation to despair, the temptation to be overwhelmed. And part of the reason that I have not uploaded anything is not just because I'm busy doing grading and writing lesson plans and calling parents and assigning detentions and following up on stuff that needs to get followed up on. Part of the reason I haven't been uploading is because I have been experiencing my own temptation to despair, my own temptation to overwhelm. And I don't know if you know this, but if you can't find a way to regulate your emotions of feeling overwhelmed, you will not survive teaching, period. Nor will you or us, we, survive the next 4 years of absolute overwhelm and the temptation to despair. Put differently, when AOC says, "I will not give them my fear," she's making an emotional, strategic choice in the long-term battle against despair. That's not an act of, needless masturbatory self-soothing. It is a strategic choice against part of the strategy of flooding the zone with shit, which is a quote from Steve Bannon, and part of the Republican media strategy, and part of why Trump is okay with making an executive order that he knows will get struck down in the courts. Because when you give an overwhelming number of things that are frightening and destroy institutions and threaten people's lives, like the USAID executive order, for example, you push people into a state of paralysis. And I, as a teacher, a 5th-year teacher at this point, am quite familiar with that state of paralysis. Getting out of it is the thing that allows you to actually survive. So how do you get out of it? Well, here's a book that I have never cited on this channel before. Drum roll, please. My bookshelf is broken into components. I've got science fiction, and I've got artificial intelligence ethics, and I've got psychology, and a little bit of the productivity bros. And it's really hard to point inverted, but I never cite this, the teaching section, because I generally have had a firewall between my video creation career and my teaching career. And given my video creation discusses politics, and given politics has been, threatening the existence of the Department of Education for whom I work, time for that firewall to get a little bit more semi-permeable as I might teach my 8th graders when we're talking about osmosis. Why can teacher tactics help you feel less despair? It's this one, Doug Lemov. It's called Positive Narration. I've reached the point in my teaching career where I mentor younger teachers, and I will observe chaotic classrooms. And one of the things that happens in chaotic classrooms is negative narration. They will be at the front of the room and be like, Alex, you're out of your seat. Why are you out of your seat? Or like, Bob, I'm making up names. Bob, why are you not doing your do now? Like, you should be working on your do now. And naming the negative things constantly naming the negative things has the effect of lowering the entire classroom culture, and in a lot of different ways. It not only doesn't praise or shine lights on the students who are doing well, but it also, when done over time as the only strategy, creates a culture where negative things are the only things that get attention. And that is when the root cause of negative behaviors is attention seeking, you will incentivize negative behaviors. That was a kind of that was a teacher phrase, but let's unpack what that means. At stake in the question of whether you choose to negatively narrate or positively narrate is the question of what do you incentivize. Attention is an incentive for a lot of people. That's true in the classroom, and that's true in the current attention economy. In fact, I exploit when I tell students every now and again, oh yeah, I do content creation. And they're like, oh yeah, whatever, how many followers do you have? I'm like, 265,000. And I get to watch their jaws drop, right? Attention is an incentive. That is true in lots and lots and lots of contexts. So when you create a world in which you only negatively narrate, you incentivize that the negative things are the things that get attention. That creates, over time, a culture of negativity, something you can overhear when you walk through a dysfunctional school, something I have done many times throughout my teaching career, and you hear teachers just constantly being negative towards students. And it's something that you feel every day when you scroll through an information environment where the most outrageous negative things rise to the top of the news cycle. The news cycle being a phrase that has a new meaning post election, post inauguration rather. The inaugurate. I gotta make a jump cut so I have enough working memory to explain that point. As often happens in my classroom, this might be an unproductive tangent. The shortest version is that we live in an information economy now, and the reason that the billionaires were at the inauguration, and the reason that the billionaires were all tech moguls, is because algorithmically mediated information economies are one of the most powerful forces in the world. And it would have been railroad tycoons if it happened 100 years ago. It would have been newspaper tycoons if it happened 80 years ago or whatever. Now it's social media tycoons, TikTok CEO, Facebook CEO. Those are where the power is. And talking about the news cycle without acknowledging the fact that we live in an algorithmically mediated information economy is one which is controlled by a handful of billionaires, is journalistic malpractice. I don't know, some kind of phrase. I gotta get back to my point about despair, and I gotta finish this video and go to a party, and I gotta leave the party and then go to do my freaking lesson plans for Monday. You can watch my other videos about algorithmic radicalization and AI and the information ecosystem, and I've covered this a lot. I got a whole master's degree studying it. Or since we're talking about the other videos, you could also join my Patreon if you're interested in supporting my sticky tab habit. And also, I bought the 3D printer with my own money. Teachers buy a lot of stuff with their own money. I buy snacks for my students with my own money. Feel free to join my Patreon if you want to support my research and my teaching now at this point. So hooray for gray areas. What were we talking about? Despair. That's what we were talking about. When you learn to narrate positively instead of narrate negatively, you flip the incentive structure and you change the way the classroom culture operates. Outrage and emotional outbursts and power struggles become less incentivized than the act of doing the work, which is usually much more boring, but not in an environment where you have flipped the incentives on their heads. So when AOC says that she's not going to give them her fear, she's making a deliberate choice. And I don't have a good transition sentence for how to get to this, but since we're so deep into the teaching career, I want to explain the last thing, which is joy. Joy is the positive narrative converse of the culture of fear. And there's nothing quite like being one of the only white people in a room at a step performance in Brooklyn to teach you that your concept of joy is anemic and in need of rehabilitation. Whiteness and white culture, and again, sorry that I'm just dropping this out of nowhere. I don't have time to write a transition, so the video has to be good enough, just like the lessons. Whiteness and our culture is often so oriented towards structure, rules, and authority that we miss joy. Black church is more joyful than white church for a lot of reasons. And if you watch the end of the AOC interview, she goes into depth of one more argument for rest as resistance and joy as resistance. It's not just good strategy to not incentivize negativity. Joy is... I don't know how to say it. It's a fundamental force, and I would just recommend you watch the full interview. I'll try to link it. It's Latino USA. It's real good. I really wish I had a better conclusion for this video. Let me think about this for a second. Okay, I listened to it all again, and I watched again some of the interview. There's a lot of things in the video that didn't get following up on stuff that needs to get followed up on. First is I talked about my own teaching practice and constantly seeing the negative in my own teaching practice. I set that up as a way to be a little bit vulnerable. I think that there are all going to be specific ways that we all individually struggle with our own internal despair. The way that this is working is that the battle is on so many fronts that it's hard to that we're losing our identities to battles in every direction. But we will have individual things. I have individual things, and just I like to model vulnerability in my classroom at the right times and in the right ways. One of the things that I need to work on is that I spend so much time seeing the negatives in my own practice that I don't see the positives in the stuff that I do. So I will work on that in terms of seeing the good in the work that I do myself. People tell me, wow, it's so good that you teach where you teach. You teach students that have a lot of unmet needs from the world, and that's really good of you. And I just brush that away. I'm like, no. And I see the negative all the time. I will try to do my own bit and see the joy in what I do, if that makes sense. Second, I said that there are times for negative narration, and there will be, and there are. And sometimes it is appropriate for us to call out negative things, to stand in your own authority and confront someone who is lying to your face. I will joke, don't gaslight me at a kid if I call them out for talking, and they're like, I wasn't talking. And I'm like, I heard you speaking with my own ears. Sometimes you got to do sometimes you got to call out negative things, and you have to say what you see. You have to bear witness to what is happening around you, and there is a time and a place for that. But don't confuse that with just reposting every negative story that you see. That continues the cycle of negative narration and incentivizing outrage and negativity. And more to the point, in the attention economy in which we live, it contributes to you spending your time and energy, your precious time and energy, the only resources you actually have, in the hands of billionaires. And finally, perfectionism. Care for this one. I said that you cannot survive as a teacher if you do not learn to regulate your emotions and overwhelm. I do not mean stoic, masculine, individual suppression of emotions. Sometimes you regulate your emotions by talking to a colleague, calling your friend, you go to Chick-fil-A that day, even though you never do that, or something. Just finding ways to regulate your emotions is not to be conflated with stoic, toxic masculinity. Again, on my other videos, emotional self-regulation via community building is something that I care about a lot. This might be the wrong book, but that brings me to my final point. Third, fourth, I lost track of the numbers. Perfectionism. Perfectionism, perfectionism, perfectionism. Perfectionism is a force of paralysis. I've already made videos about this, and I'm not going to repeat myself. I mean, I do often, but that's a move I'm just going to make for the sake of whimsy and this video being teacher-tastic in all directions. Just do your homework. Watch the video that I already made about it. It was about Elise Myers and call it culture and liberal perfectionism, and it is relevant insofar as we will need to be building coalitions with recently converted Trump supporters, right? There will be people who disagree with us on every single front except for one, and we got to work with them on that one. That's something we have to learn to do, and we don't do that as liberals because we believe that, here I go repeating myself, we don't do that as liberals because we think that if we ever work with someone, it is implicitly condoning every belief that they have. And so we spend a lot of our time and energy evaluating the people around us to see whether or not they are perfect enough for us to align our brands with, for us to be associated with, and that's a shitty way to build coalitions, and it has failed. It did fail, and we watched it fail when we lost this election spectacularly to a multiply convicted felon who was impeached twice, fomented an insurrection, banged a porn star, and paid her off so that she wouldn't look directly at the sun, mishandled the COVID pandemic, all of the things, pardoned a bunch of his friends. I still haven't been able to make a video about the frickin' Mueller report. I haven't been able to catch up about this. He pardoned a bunch of his friends that went to jail for him for stuff. They confessed to stuff, and he just pardoned. Anyway, what was I talking about? Perfectionism is, we're going to have to work with people who just realized that Trump was bad because of one thing, and we gotta fan that flame like a like a blacksmith stokes a fire early on, and it's just smoldering embers, not throw a wet blanket on top of it with our fucking high and mighty liberal energy. I'm so sick of it. That video went viral for a reason. It got banned from TikTok for a reason. Go watch it. It's a good video. Conclusion. I told some of my students yesterday that I realized this week that I was not bringing, as I was reflecting on the not uploading because I was a teacher thing, that I've not been bringing the full force of my intellect to my teaching, nor have I been bringing the full force of my moral authority to my videos. I realized that I was not bringing the full force of my intellect to my teaching, nor the full force of my moral authority to my content. At some point, I want to talk through the soft lockdown that we had and how many times I've led students through school shooter drills and the number of times that I have needed to comfort children living through trauma. There are a lot of things about that life that I don't share here, and because I couldn't figure out the rules about student anonymity and all these sorts of things. I'm figuring those out, but I will do this. The last lesson of the video is that my first year teaching, I would spend like 4 hours on every lesson plan. Turns out you can't do that sustainably. You got to learn to cultivate joy. You got to learn to narrate the positive. You got to learn to disincentivize the negative, to not engage, to call out things. There's all these tools and all these things. But in a world of teaching, where you are being pulled in a million directions at once every single hour by students with different needs, and administrators with different needs, and teachers, and office politics, and literal politics, like it's impossible. And to make a point of synthesis, there's a book up there about with constraints and ethics, and my brain's melting. This is like explaining that's like an hour-long video. I'll do it later. You can't survive if you spend 4 hours on a lesson plan. You can't survive if you grade everything perfectly. You can't survive if you script every parent call in advance. You must learn to do things imperfectly. Good enough is good enough sometimes. You will not be good at being joyful in the way that you can envision yourself being joyful. But it is good enough for you to be a little bit more happy than you were before, because you know that it's good strategy, and because on some level you know that your life matters even though the world around you is telling you that it doesn't. I'm Charlie. This does not make sense to me. I'm Charlie, and also Mr. Peterson 3D printed this one the other day to put on my door. Join the Patreon if you're interested in supporting my content, incentivizing me and my intellectual expression and research. Thank you for your time. Have a great day, and see you in the next one.